Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Fantasy Roundup for November the 2nd. I'm Zack Ewing with Spencer the Guru Urquhart. This is week 9 of the NFL season. I had to think about that for a minute. When you're having fun, man.
Yes, indeed.
Week 9 of the NFL season. This is the Fantasy Roundup on bet.nola.com. It's brought to you by Caesars Sportsbook. Before we get going, I'd like to remind you, you can sign up for the Caesars Sportsbook app and be ready for mobile betting when it hits Louisiana. Go to nola.com/Caesars, and you'll get a $100 free bet bonus when mobile betting launches, which we think will probably be sometime in the next month. I've been telling people I hope it's an early Christmas present. We'll see exactly how early. As of Sunday, you can bet at casinos in the state, at least a few of them. And the mobile betting is about a month behind that. So we'll see, maybe early December. But again, go to nola.com/Caesars. You can download the app. You can make a deposit. You can get your bonus. You can be ready to go the minute that mobile sports betting is ready. So we are looking forward to that. And we're looking forward to week 9 of the fantasy football season, Spencer. But also, as we always do, we want to take a few minutes to look back at week 8. And so with that in mind, let's take a look. And we'll look at the top quarterback scores. If you could have pinpointed this top 5, I would have called you absolutely insane last week. Let's look at who the top 5 are. No surprise at the top, Josh Allen, and no surprise at number 5 and Tom Brady. Jimmy Garoppolo, Mike White, and Justin Fields, 2 through 4. That is a combo I did not expect.
Wow, yeah, that's insanity there. That's just, especially Mike White in the middle of that. I mean, you could maybe think, maybe Jimmy G or Fields could do well. Then, yeah, sure enough, they ended up in a shootout, both that good games. But yeah, White, that just came out of nowhere. I thought Bengals, Jets, I thought that was the lock of the week. I thought the Bengals would steamroll the Jets. But, hey, look at Mike White. Big ups to him. Had a big game to keep the Jets, I'm not saying contention. I mean, they're probably not going nowhere. But at least showing that they're a respectable opponent and that they can get some offense going there. So that was encouraging to see there, no doubt.
Yeah, DFS lineups that used that 49ers-Bears game were way ahead of the field because nobody expected it to be a shootout, but there you had it being a shootout. And I stacked Carson Wentz and Michael Pittman in my lineup, which was 2 touchdowns in the first quarter. But I missed in a lot of other places, and I didn't have anything from that San Francisco-Chicago game. And so, it just goes to show you that's why we love this crazy game. You cannot predict it at all.
Right.
And top scoring running backs, there's a few more familiar names, but the name at the top, Michael Carter of the Jets, 32.2 points, the top scorer by more than 7 points among running backs. Couldn't have called that one either, Spencer.
No, yeah, that was a surprise. The fact that he was that involved in the passing game, I believe caught 9 passes for 95 yards. A huge day for Michael Carter, somebody that I wish I'd have kept him in one of my leagues. It was a shallower league that I had him in, and I was like, he's on the Jets. He probably won't do much moving forward, but he's taken the lead role there and ran with it, and he's somebody to definitely to watch moving forward as he topped all. I mean, all these other guys in this list are guys that have been on it before, Mixon, Eckler, Aaron Jones, and Darrell Henderson. But Carter, man, he's making his presence known.
Yeah, I have a league where I have a really good receiving core, but they all sort of struggled this week. Devontae Adams was one of them. He didn't play. Terry McLaurin wasn't that good this week. DJ Moore wasn't that good. Jerry Jeudy wasn't that good. Jamar Chase was fine, but not, didn't really pop off. Kyle Pitts didn't do any good. But I still won because I have Michael Carter and Joe Mixon. And so I was able to, they were able to carry the freight for me. So I was happy with those two. And Michael Carter, people have been saying since draft season, he is the most talented back for the Jets. The question is just similar to Javonte Williams of the Broncos. Is he going to get the lion's share of the carries and the targets? And now that he is, he's a guy you want to have rostered and in most cases, I think, in your starting lineup too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to trust any Jets, but he's the one that I'd say is pretty trustworthy at this point.
Man, how dare you denigrate Mike White like that? Fantasy football's number 3 quarterback for week 8.
Yeah, he also did it. They give him more props. He did it without Corey Davis. Corey Davis was an unexpected inactive, so that was even. And once I saw it, I was like, oh, Mike White, he'll be lucky to throw for 100 yards, and then goes and does that.
Whew. I mean, you kidding me? Taking a look at wide receivers now. I mentioned Michael Pittman with a couple of touchdown passes. A.J. Brown really went off. He had 155 yards and 10 catches, and so he's your number 1 receiver. Tyreek Hill, really the only player from that Monday night game who got off, and then Amari Cooper back from the dead after a couple of bad weeks.
Right. Yeah. Same with Tyler Lockett. Those guys we know the drill with them, a super roller coaster type receivers, but their big weeks are big enough to where they're still worth rostering and starting most weeks. And AJ Brown, a huge one, Michael Pittman, Chris Godwin. I had a league where I had a great trio of, I had AJ Brown leading, and I actually had Pittman on the bench, and then my other two were Cooper Kupp and Debo. So it's a lot of receivers going off right now.
Yeah, I mean, people talk about the 0 RB strategy in fantasy football, where when you draft, you either don't draft any running backs at the top, or you draft one and then wait on your RB2 for a long time and then just go pick up a bunch of handcuffs and hope that one of them hits. And this year might be the poster year for RB0 because, number one, there's been a lot of injuries. I mean, listen, if you spent your first round pick on Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, trying to think who else. All of these guys have missed time. Joe Mixon missed a game, I think. And so if you had the handcuffs, if you drafted Chuba Hubbard, if you drafted Alexander Madison, if you drafted Michael Carter late and just sort of some of these lotto tickets and focused on drafting real good wide receivers and tight ends and the quarterback, you're in good shape right now. Right
on, yeah. They have had a few receivers bust, though. I mean, look at Calvin Ridley and such. I mean, overall, though, the running backs have probably been more disappointing, especially to some of those early ones like you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, you can't predict it for sure, and there's no sure thing, but it does seem like fantasy football, like the real NFL, is trending more and more and more toward wide receivers as super valuable and running backs not quite as much. Tight ends has been a weird one because we thought the top tight ends would be super valuable this year, but George Kittle still can't get healthy. Mark Andrews has been real up and down. Kyle Pitts has been up and down. Darren Waller's gotten hurt. And now even Travis Kelce, I'm not sure he's completely healthy. He was really a dud on Monday night. And so some guys who have sort of stepped into the fray here. TJ Hockenson, he's been a little bit up and down too, but he's on an upswing. Former Saint Dan Arnold having a real consistent year. Dallas Goedert with Zach Ertz out of the picture having a good year. And then, I mean, even guys, Pat Freiermuth, the rookie in Pittsburgh, and Brevin Jordan in Houston. Not that these are real high-scoring numbers. It was not a good week for tight ends. But just the fact that these guys are producing is notable.
Right. Yeah, this is a terrible week for tight ends, to be quite honest. It was just nothing much to be found at the position. When Travis Kelce struggles, that's not a good sign. But it was good to see Hockenson bounce back, and Goddard's done well ever since Ertz left. So there are still some decent pieces to be found on the waiver wire this week, which we'll get to in a little bit. I was surprised that they have a decent amount of tight ends worth picking up if you're in need of one for this week.
Yeah, one thing about tight ends this year, there hasn't been a real superstar at the position, at least not consistently. We've had big weeks. We've had Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, Travis Kelce have all had really big weeks, but they haven't been consistent. But there do seem to be more who are serviceable. There's
more depth.
Good 20 tight ends who you wouldn't mind having if you had to have them in a starting lineup. Just about almost every team's got somebody who you're like, if it's a bye week fill-in, I can trust that guy to maybe get me 8 to 10 points and not be a black hole. Hey, you're watching the Fantasy Roundup live on bet.nola.com. If you have a question or a comment, you can drop it in the comment section on YouTube. And or on Facebook, and we are happy to answer you live here on the Fantasy Roundup. Spencer the Guru will get to you. And in the meantime, we'll continue our look back at Week 8. A.J. Brown is your fantasy star for the week, Spencer.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, AJB, man, what a week. He started off slow, real slow, coming off knee surgery this offseason. But he's healthy now. He's healthy now, and he's really turned it on as of late. Just a huge game today, and he should, Sunday, he should continue that moving forward with Derrick Henry out for the season. They're going to have to throw more in Tennessee. So I would say A.J. Brown is a WR1 moving forward for sure. He's just, I've had him in some leagues, glad to have him. I was a little nervous there after the slow start, but I stuck with him, and I'm glad I did.
His impact, Spencer, with Derrick Henry out, do you think he is targeted more? Do you think this hurts him? Because Now teams will key on him more because they don't have to worry about the threat of Henry. How do you think that affects him?
Yeah, I think he'll do. Yeah, he should get even more targets. I mean, he could get keyed on more some, but I think once Julio can come back, if Julio Jones could ever get healthy, then that'll make it to where they have to. They can't just double AJ because they have Julio on the opposite side. So if Julio continues to have trouble, then yeah, AJ Brown might get almost like triple cover because who else did they even have? But I feel like if Julio can come back, AJ will actually do better because they're gonna be probably more of a passing team now without Henry.
Yeah, the Titans with Adrian Peterson and Julio Jones. If this was 2015, man, that would be a scary offense. Not so sure now that losing Derrick Henry obviously is a big blow to that team. So much of their identity wrapped up in him, and so it's possible. I mean, they say he's out indefinitely. I would think if the Titans can make the playoffs, which they still have a 3-game lead over the Colts in the AFC South, he could be back for the playoffs. The real world playoffs, the NFL playoffs, but from a fantasy perspective, you're dropping him, right? He's not even worth the IR spot.
Yeah, probably not. Have they? I haven't. I don't think they've had like a timetable for sure yet, but I think it was like 6 to 10 weeks. So I hate to drop him yet, but I mean, that's probably unfortunately, it's just tough to drop the number one player when he hasn't like Winston's like officially out, so at Henry, it's like, I don't know if I'd drop him quite yet, but it's close to that point.
Yeah, I guess that's true. It may depend on how else your bench is structured, how deep your league is. If you have the IR spot available, why not stash him for a month just to see if we get a more definite timetable headed into December? Because listen, if you can make the fantasy playoffs without him and he does come back on December 19th or whatever it is, you're going to want him in the lineup for your semifinals and final if you can somehow survive without him. So it's a big blow, but you're right. If you've got 2 other injured guys, you've got a David Montgomery who is coming back in a couple of weeks, or you've got a Russell Wilson who is coming back. Maybe, unfortunately, you may have to drop Henry and at least until those guys come back, and then maybe you can scoop him up off waivers in the next month. So it's an unfortunate situation, and it's something we'll talk more about. My fantasy star for Week 8, I talked about him a minute ago already, Michael Carter, 9 catches for 95 yards out of the running back position. He also averaged more than 5 yards per carry, so 24 touches. If he can get 24 touches every week, the man is going to be very valuable. And it wasn't just this week. He had 8 receptions the week before, so that's 17 over the past 2 games, and he's really becoming a very viable, I think, RB2, Spencer.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, we mentioned him earlier, how much more valuable he's become getting the more of the workhorse treatment. I hope that lasts. It's just tough to trust the Jet, but like I said, if there is any one Jet to trust, it would have to be MC.
Yeah, it's like rule number 1 of fantasy football: don't trust a Jet. But we might have to amend that rule for Michael Carter at this point, and maybe, I mean, I don't know, if you're in a super flex league, I guess you got to pick up Mike White at this point. I mean, he's in a super flex, he's worth having just in case that was not a flash in the pan.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna try to get him this week in my super flex where I have Zach Wilson. I have quarterback trouble there with Geno Smith on bye. All I have is Josh Allen. So yeah, I'll definitely be putting in a bid for Mike White.
Words you did not think you'd be saying a couple of weeks ago.
No.
but here we are. NFL trade deadline was today, by the way. No really big trades today. Of course, yesterday we had news that Von Miller is on his way to LA to play for the Rams. Not a huge fantasy impact there, I guess, unless you have the Rams defense. Probably a few more sacks down the road for that squad. And other than that, I don't think that, Deshaun Watson did not get dealt. We talked about that last week. The Saints did not. They apparently were interested in Odell Beckham, but did not pull the trigger on that trade. Fantasy perspective, the trade deadline was just a little bit of a dud. There was some other news, though, of course. Jameis Winston getting hurt. Derrick Henry getting hurt. Winston out for the season, torn ACL. Of course, everybody around here knows that. Derrick Henry, broken bone in his foot, out indefinitely, probably most of the rest of the regular season. And then Henry Ruggs today, just a tragic story. A DUI in Las Vegas. I shouldn't say charged with DUI in Las Vegas. DUI resulting in death. The driver of the other vehicle was unfortunately killed. And so you can't expect Henry Ruggs to be playing again this season, pending his legal involvement in this case and things like that. And again, it's trivial to talk about fantasy football when we're talking about somebody who lost their life and somebody else getting charged with a serious crime. But this is a fantasy football show, and so if Henry Ruggs is on your team, you probably need to look for a replacement at this point.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that shake thing shakes things up for the Raiders with there's going to be more targets up for grabs and such. And this is a resilient team. I mean, they've overcome the John Gruden fiasco, so I wouldn't expect this to rattle them too much. Yeah, it's really tough, obviously, but I would think Derek Carr and company should be just fine moving forward. They've established themselves as a legit contender and a strong offense.
And Carr's a guy who has always spread the ball around anyway, so maybe I don't know if Zay Jones steps in and gets more targets, or trying to think of who's further. Hunter Renfrow certainly becomes more of a top guy, and so it's a tough situation, but he has spread the ball around anyway. So having said that, with injuries and legal news and all that kind of stuff, it's an interesting waiver wire this week. They're not always interesting. Sometimes you really got to scrape the bottom of the barrel. But there's guys out there worth targeting this week, Spencer.
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, like I mentioned in my column that just got published, I was saying, gotta get this week right. Gotta target the right guys, especially at running back if you're a Derrick Henry owner, because it's just, and you lose the best player in fantasy, it's just like, it's just, you're in a frenzy, panicking. But I would say, I wasn't going to do it, but I was like, man, to me, Adrian Peterson has got to be the top pickup because of the way the Titans, we were talking that, they're going to throw more for sure, but they're still at heart a running team. Like, they're not just going to completely abandon the run. They're not going to become the Chiefs, I don't think, and just throw every time. But with that in mind, I think Peterson is going to see a lot of work because, he'll be, he hadn't played to start the season, so he'll be somewhat fresh despite his advanced age. And he's somebody that's shown that he always stays in good shape. He's always ready. And while he probably won't be the most efficient runner, I think he'll, chew up those early down carries, be a big bruiser there, and see those goal line carries too. Could end up with a lot of touchdowns. Henry's always on that ridiculous touchdown pace. So he's obviously not Derrick Henry, but I think he'll be fantasy relevant for sure. And then, talking about tight ends, I think Fryer was the top guy for this week with his potential to continue to improve in that offense, especially with no Juju. And then Carson Wentz, I feel like for streaming quarterbacks is probably the top one. I know Taysom Hill is in the mix too for long term. I think for this week, streaming Wentz is the guy to go after against the Jets.
Yeah, and that's the Thursday night game. So certainly, if you want to do that, get on it. My waiver wire targets, I did go with Taysom Hill, and I think, again, the Saints did not make a trade. They could still sign somebody. They could sign Cam Newton. I heard today Phillip Rivers said that if he has not been contacted, but if he was, he'd be interested. I don't know. I don't think that'll happen. But I suppose they could sign somebody. But for right now, it looks like Taysom Hill is going to be the starting quarterback of the Saints for the rest of the year. And we'll see what that means from an NFL perspective. From a fantasy perspective, when Taysom Hill filled in for Drew Brees last year for 4 games, the Saints went 3-1, and Taysom Hill had 3 of the 4 games were really good fantasy games. He struggled a little bit up in Philadelphia, but still had 60 or 70 yards rushing. The one game where he didn't have big numbers was against Denver when Denver was playing without a quarterback because of COVID reasons. And the Saints were super conservative on offense. But he's a guy a little bit in the Jalen Hurts mold where is he going to be a Pro Bowler? Probably not. But is he going to rack up fantasy points? Yes, I think he is.
Yeah, I think so. He's definitely one of in super flex formats that I'll be targeting heavily because he could have a decent week this week. Not sure though with coming off the concussion, but hey, if he can take the role and run with it, he's somebody that moving forward could end up a QB1 with his rushing potential.
Yeah, you say super flex for sure, but even in regular leagues, if you're like a 12-team league or even a 14-team league, he's a guy, if you're not sure who to start, certainly if you had Jameis Winston in there, or if you had, Matt Ryan's been totally up and down, Kirk Cousins, I don't know. There's some of these guys one of those guys who got on the Sam Darnold train earlier this year and that's crashed. Taysom Hill's probably an upgrade over a lot of those guys.
Right, yeah, man, that Darnold train, and then Matt Ryan last week, man, that game was just ugly. That was ugly on both sides.
Yeah, it was something else. My other pickup suggestions: Tim Patrick of the Broncos. He was dropped in like 50% of leagues. This is a guy who was 80% owned a couple weeks ago. When Jerry Jeudy came off the IR, it was, they're not going to throw to Tim Patrick anymore. But he caught 4 passes, I think, for 60-something yards. Still led the team in receiving. I don't know that he's a guy I'd want to start every week, but if you need help at receiver, he's clearly not totally out of the Broncos' plans. And then Carlos Hyde of the Jaguars. If James Robinson can't go and he's banged up, then Carlos Hyde's going to get some volume. And so, again, if you're a Derrick Henry owner, you want to put in for Adrian Peterson, you want to try to find some other solutions, but one guy, at least a temporary solution, could be Carlos Hyde.
Yep. Yeah, hopefully Robinson's injury isn't serious because, man, we've had so many pile up here recently. I think the Henry thing really just is like an exclamation point. I mean, the Christian McCaffrey thing was bad enough, but I mean, now Henry too. Henry was like the one guy at running back you could trust to play every game, and then him too. It's just So hopefully J Rob's okay. We gotta these injuries have to stop.
Zack, Ewing and Spencer Urquhart on the Fantasy Roundup here on bet.nola.com. We are with you for another 20 minutes or so. And if you've got any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. We are here to help you in DFS, which you can now play in Louisiana. We're here to help you with your season-long leagues, waiver wire targets, trade questions, all of the above. And speaking of DFS, Spencer has some values for us this week looking at on the daily fantasy side.
Yep. And we talked about Carr and the Raiders. I'm thinking that this week against the Giants that he could be a good value play. And him and Hunter Renfrow with Henry Ruggs out. Renfrow should see more targets, and him and Brian Edwards. I think Renfrow is probably the ideal on the stack with Carr. I think they'll be going with, finding each other a lot throughout the day. Zach Moss at running back, I think, is a good play this week against Jacksonville. Should be able to run all over them, and he's been getting more involved in the passing game. It's been encouraging to see on that front. And then Tyler Conklin at tight end, a really good value this week, considering Baltimore has been very vulnerable against tight ends, and Conklin's been steadily getting more involved in that Vikings offense, in which they should bounce back this week after their dud performance this week against Dallas.
Yeah, that was something else, man, especially from a fantasy perspective. I had picked up Kirk Cousins as a bye week fill-in, and he just started out real well and then did nothing the rest of the night. So that didn't go as planned. My DFS values for week 9, already mentioned him. I'm going to start with Taysom Hill, $5,500. I mean, a super bargain there, about $2,000 less than a quarterback. I think he'll, the types of quarterbacks, he'll put up numbers with them. Again, you have to watch the injury report, make sure he is playing before you put him in a DFS lineup, of course. But Sean Payton said he was very close last week to returning for the Saints. And I would think we'll be back from that concussion this week. And so if he is going to start and he is off of the injured list, then Taysom Hill, great value at $5,500. I threw Boston Scott on there. Maybe I'm a week late on this one. He had the big week last week. But it seems like the Eagles are willing to get him more involved. And I also picked Dallas Goedert off the Eagles. The Chargers, quite frankly, have been a wreck defensively. And so I'm targeting those guys a little bit. Jalen Hurts going to be more expensive, but you could even put him in there with a Dallas Goedert stack or a Jalen Reagor stack. The types of off-the-radar, kind of like 49ers Bears last week, if you can pinpoint those off-the-radar matchups, they can win you DFS games. And then also pick Marquise Brown of the Ravens. They're playing the Vikings. And again, look at what Amari Cooper did to the Vikings. This is a similar type receiver who busts some big plays. He's not going to be super consistent, but it feels like this is a week where he could pop off.
Yeah, very well could, and then keep an eye on my boy Rashad Bateman. I've mentioned him the past few weeks. Maybe he could get in on the action there. Should be a high scoring affair there, Ravens and Vikings.
It's funny you said that because we're going to talk sleepers next, and I almost went with Rashad Bateman as my sleeper. And then I thought, we've done that before. I think both of us have had him as a sleeper already this year. We're both real high on him. And he hasn't had that 1 week where he's totally popped off. I do think it's coming at some point. Don't know if it'll be this week. I guess we'll see. But I am high on Bateman as well. But instead for your sleeper, you said never trust a Jet. You said never trust a Jet. And now here we are telling you Michael Carter and another Jet?
Yeah, Elijah Moore, he was somebody that I thought we could maybe trust before the season, and then he just didn't get anything going. But hey, this Mike White magic could continue, and he's showing that he's a primary target there, especially if Corey Davis is out. If Corey Davis plays, then I'm backing off on this one. But I don't think he'll play, being that it's a short week. So I'm thinking that Moore will once again be a focal point in that what was thought to be a terrible offense. But I mean, it's looking like it might be decent because the Bengals, that was a really strong defense. It's not like they just did that against some cupcake defense. So I'm thinking that Moore could continue the momentum this week against the Colts defense that got shredded up recently by Tennessee. Yeah,
I mean, the Colts, I've always thought of them in recent years as having a good secondary, but they have not really proven that. I mean, they can be vulnerable against the right attack, and so not a bad pick there at all for a sleeper. I went with Javonte Williams of the Broncos, and I'm thinking a little bit of his college teammate Michael Carter here. I do think the Broncos, they traded, they made the big trade with Von Miller. I almost said Von Bell, with Von Miller this week, and so obviously it's a sign that they are starting to give up on this season and build for the future. Maybe not completely. I thought they might trade Melvin Gordon and really open things up for Javonte Williams. They didn't do that. But if you're starting to build toward the future, wouldn't you want to play your young guys a little bit more? And that's my thought process here is maybe Javonte Williams starts to get more snaps than Melvin Gordon. We've sort of been anticipating that throughout the year. I think Javonte Williams has the much higher upside. He's much younger. And at some point, the Broncos will phase Gordon out and Williams more in.
Right. Hopefully so. I was thinking they might very well trade Melvin Gordon, being that he's showing he's still got some juice left. I was thinking a contender might swoop in and want to trade for him, but for now it's probably just going to be that committee. But I think as the year goes on, we'll see, like you said, more and more Javonte, since they're a team that's just not really in true contention. Although, 4-4, they're not out of it, but it's just, with the Von Miller trade, that tells me they're prepared to start building for the future, not too worried about this year.
Well, this is the Fantasy Roundup on bet.nola.com, and I'm Zack Ewing. That's Spencer the Guru Urquhart. If you have some questions for Spencer, you can certainly ask him during the week. You can ask him here on the show in the comments if you have one real quick. In fact, we just got one in, it looks like. Justin asks, Spencer, would you trade away DJ Moore, Javonte Williams, and Dalton Schultz in exchange for Myles Gaskin, DeAndre Hopkins, and Rashad Bateman? So it says Hopkins would go into his flex spot. He's got Kyle Pitts at tight end.
Let's see here. Yeah, I don't think I would do this because I'm not really a big Hopkins fan right now. With Kyler Murray banged up, and it's the way they spread things out there in Arizona. Hopkins himself is kind of banged up. I do like the Bateman thing, but Schultz is a good backup tight end in case Pitts struggles continue. And then Javonte, I feel like is better long term than Gaskin. And at this point, I think DJ Moore is probably more trustworthy than D-Hop, since D-Hop's been so up and down. I'd probably pass on this.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think if you break that down player by player, there's a little more value in the first half of that. Maybe Hopkins pops off. Maybe Bateman becomes the star. But right now, the safer thing is the front half of that deal. And so I'd hang on to those guys, Justin. As I was saying, if you have questions after the show, you can reach out to Spencer on Twitter or Instagram. He is at Spencer the Guru, and that's anything from lineup questions, DFS questions, trade questions, of course, how injuries would impact guys. I do think it's interesting talking about, we've talked about the Derrick Henry situation. Jameis Winston out for the season in New Orleans. Michael Thomas, don't know when he's going to come back. He kind of hinted on social media that maybe it was more than an injury situation because Calvin Ridley, we know, is out for, I guess the best way to put it would be mental health reasons. And Michael Thomas tweeted out, "Hey, Calvin Ridley, I'm in there. I'm in that hole with you." And so I don't know if there's something beyond the injury or what the situation is there, but I don't know that we can expect Michael Thomas back this week. I think he was designated to return from IR 2 weeks ago, and so he's got to come back for the following week against Tennessee. But in the meantime, how do you rate the remaining guys on the Saints offense? I mean, Alvin Kamara, obviously you're going to start. You're going to play him. Are there any of the receivers or tight ends that you like better than the others, or are they all sort of irrelevant from a season-long fantasy perspective?
Yeah, I think maybe Marquez Callaway could do better here with Taysom, because in the preseason, if I'm remembering right, him and Taysom had a really good connection. I think this really hurts Traquan Smith, though, because it seemed like Traquan was somebody that had a really good connection with Jameis, and then when Jameis went down, he didn't do too well in the rest of the way against Tampa. And then Deontay Harris just 2 hit or miss. The tight end room 2 hit or miss. So I'd say maybe keep an eye on Callaway, and then of course Michael Thomas when he comes back. But yeah, outside of Kamara, it's not too pretty.
Yeah, I mean, you got to remember last year when Taysom Hill was the quarterback, he targeted Michael Thomas heavily. So if and when Michael Thomas comes back, he is still a guy you can consider a borderline wide receiver 1-2. I think he's in that range. We just need to know when he's going to come back. And so at this point, you're still playing that waiting game. I've got him on the IR in one of my leagues, sort of impatiently waiting. But when he's ready, we'll be ready to put him in our lineups. Another question comes in from Michael. Michael has Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen. Thinks he can get Jalen Hurts for cheap because he is somebody's backup for Kyler Murray. Question is, do you stick with Herbert or do you go get Jalen Hurts?
Oh, I'd stick with Herbert, man. I'm a Herbert truther. They throw so much there, and with the Chargers, I mean, he didn't do great this week. But I mean, shoot, he was facing New England and Belichick. They shut him down last year, and this year they did better. And I think he's somebody you can trust more. Hurts, I know he has that rushing floor, but I mean, shoot, even last week in the blowout win against the Lions, he didn't do much as a passer. Don't have a whole lot of weapons. So I mean, maybe if you can. I wouldn't give up much. I mean, it's always good to have a decent backup quarterback. So, I mean, if you could get Hurts for the load and go ahead, but I would say Herbert would still be your QB1. I'd stick with it.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of having that depth. You never know when there'll be an injury. Herbert's kind of what Phillip Rivers on us last week. You just, you can't. Maybe he's not as trustworthy as we thought. But the question there, Michael, is how cheap can you get Hurts for? Because if you can get him for a guy who's not currently in your starting lineup, or let's say you get to full strength after all the bye weeks and would not be in your starting lineup, maybe it's worth having that depth. But if it's not that cheap, I don't think you really have a need there.
Yeah.
Again, Spencer, we appreciate all the insight. And again, you can ask Spencer at Spencer the Guru on Twitter or Instagram if you have other lineup questions for the rest of the week. Richard just asked a question too. Is AP a pickup and stash? I think so. I think certainly if you can get him, you get him.
Yeah, you got to. Like I mentioned in the column, it's just one of those deals where, they're not gonna. He's not King Henry, but with Tennessee, like that's a power run team, and Peterson's a power back, so I think he'll do enough to be worth a pickup and stash for sure.
If you're in a fab league, how much of what you have remaining would you target for AP? I don't think he's one of those guys where you go all out unless you're desperate. But what percentage are you talking about as far as fab?
I would say anywhere from if you don't have much left, then I'd say like I wouldn't spend more than about I'm trying to think $20 to $50 in it. Like I know a lot of these like $100 in fab, so I'd probably say like no more than 50.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on your situation too. I'm in a league where I've got Mixon and Michael Carter, and I've got David Montgomery coming back in a couple weeks, and so I probably am not going to go after Peterson real heavy because, I'm just better off saving that budget. But if you had Derrick Henry, you don't have a clear replacement for him. That's something that you might want to think about putting a little bit more. And if it's a waiver wire situation, again, it depends on exactly what you need. But I think I'm definitely putting in a bid for him to see what you can get. You can read Spencer's column on bet.nola.com, and he'll also be back in Friday's Times Picayune. So we're looking forward to that. Spencer, any other thoughts with Week 9 coming up?
All right, yeah, just just keep riding the wave, y'all. Just keep stay calm, don't panic. This is a rough week with injuries, but should be better for Week 9. So I'm just hoping that'll just continue to not get any worse from the injury perspective. As a bye week, we got through bye Mageddon, so we got through that. We have 4 on bye this week. Tampa Bay, the big one there, but it should be better this week, hopefully.
Yeah, I have one league where I'm playing the guy who has Brady, and he's got Derrick Henry. So I think I caught him at the right time. I got to feel happy about that. Well, good luck to everybody out there in Week 9 of fantasy football. Spencer and I are playing each other in fantasy basketball this week.
Oh yeah, big one, man.
We're up against each other, baby, and I think you have a small lead on me after day 1. So we'll see how that goes.
Oh yeah, I'm excited. Yeah, you're 2-0. I'm 1-1, so I need to try to get the dub.
Top scorer in the league. You got to come at me, bro.
Yeah, I will.
we'll see what happens in that. We'll let you know in the Guru's Fantasy Basketball League how that goes next week. But in the meantime, check us out at the book on Thursday. We'll have your sports betting weekend preview. And until then, this is the Fantasy Roundup on bet.nola.com. It's brought to you by Caesar Sportsbook. For Spencer the Guru Urquhart, I'm Zack Ewing, and we'll see you next time, everybody.